it might be counterintuitive, but when I was listening to you talk about your experiences, I wondered, do you think that in South Korea, it's sometimes easier to be a foreigner than to be a halfie? Are there more expectations on people like yourself in terms of language and cultural understanding and history? Do people who are 100% foreigners get an easier ride? You know, you say one sentence of Korean and people lose their mind, and look, they can eat spicy food and kimchi. So we would imagine, I think, that people with Korean heritage like yourself would find it easier here because of the background and understanding. But do you think it's the other way around? What's your take on this, Becky?
Yeah, Korean culture and Korean language and the history, I think it can be difficult to understand if you're not innately, naturally growing up with this at a younger age. And I also think that when you are half Korean, there will be some more expectations placed on you, and come with that, I think sometimes a sense of guilt when you cannot match those expectations. For example, that what you had mentioned, the statement, oh wow, your Korean is so good, right? If you say 안녕하세요 and everyone's just amazing, your Korean is so good. Spoken to me, let's say, as half Korean, it can feel like a double-edged sword, because on one hand, you know they're complimenting you, but on the other hand, you also know, but I should be speaking Korean well. So by you saying, wow, your Korean is so well, it implies that you're shocked. And then that means my Korean isn't good. And so then I feel like a sense of burden, a sense of guilt, as if there's these things that I should know, that should innately be mine, that I don't know. And it can be very hurtful. So I think in that sense, these expectations to know implicit cultural rules that you may not have had the opportunity to learn. And then when you can't match those expectations, you really can, knock yourself down. To give an example, when I was working at a Korean agency, and I was the only half Korean in the whole agency. It's quite a big agency. And then we had one person who was American, who was there, who was not Korean. And this person didn't speak Korean. They just spoke English. And everyone would speak to me in Korean. And I had never worked in a Korean business setting like this. And I had to follow all the rules that were happening in the office. And I just picked it up, right? I had to pick it up. And this other person, not at all, didn't have to follow any rules at all. However, when I did break a rule, or when there was something that I should have known, but I didn't because I'd never experienced it before, then people would say, oh, well, Becky's a foreigner, so that's why she doesn't know. So it was a strange burden of being expected to follow all of the rules and standards. But when you do break it, then you're just suddenly switched off from being Korean. She's not Korean anyway, so what could we have expected more? And so there's a bit of a burden, and like I said, very strongly felt sense of guilt when you feel like you cannot match those expectations. But on the other hand, there are some aspects of being mixed Korean that do give you some benefits. I had spoken with one individual who's Korean and Egyptian, and he said here in Korea, he would always tell people, I'm half Korean, not I'm half Egyptian. Should it have made a difference? I don't know. His language level would have been the same. His experience in Korean culture would have been the same. But simply by stating, I'm half Korean, he said it would put other people at more ease with him in certain settings. Like, oh, well, then he'll understand some things. Or, oh, that's fine. Then he gets it. He's also Korean. So in that case, it can give you a bit of an in, right? But then sometimes it's much easier being completely foreign instead. You're just given a pass if you don't understand things.